Hi, welcome to another episode of Destination Ipswich. I'm Gordon Harris, I'm the Ipswich Town Historian, and today we're at the Old North Burial Ground on High Street. It's really cool here today because it's Friday the 13th and Halloween is only about 3 days away. This is one of the oldest gravestones in America, and we're fortunate that in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, Franklin Delano Roosevelt put people to work with the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Work Progress Administration. And they sent a crew into the old burial ground here to do some restoration. Well, what happened was that these guys thought, hey, you know, these gravestones aren't quite in line. We'll line them up, and they started digging them up. Well, the local Ipswich Historical Society freaked out. They came over and they got everything back where it was supposed to be as much as possible. And in the process, they wrote this book. It's called Memento Mori, and it has the inscriptions, the locations of every gravestone in the cemetery. And it's a large cemetery. It has well over 1,000, I think almost a couple thousand gravestones. And when you're going up the hill there, it actually goes up to the modern cow cemetery that people interned in today. But what we're going to look at today is the oldest part. So the maps in the book show you different sections, and fortunately what I've done is I put these maps and all of the individual interments, the names of the people, and even links to the Find a Grave site on my site, historicipswich.net. So I hope you'll go there and maybe look for your ancestors, just check it out. But come on, let's go for a walk. So guess what happened? We walked into the old burial ground here, and I saw my good friend Rachel Meyer. She and her partner Josh have been doing a long-term project here, restoring all the gravestones. And I'll be honest, this tour would hardly be possible without the kind of work that they did. We had a restoration survey done, and then they took over. And tell us what you've been doing.
I think this is our 6th or 7th year. We've repaired over 400 gravestones.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and what's funny about that is when you repair gravestones, sometimes you're excavating and you find even more gravestones. So I think we're around 400 gravestones that we were hired to repair. I can't tell you how many we've actually pulled out of the ground and put back in that were surprises.
Oh, I remember just last year I was walking on this path and I saw Josh like halfway down in a hole in the ground pulling up two halves of a gravestone that we didn't even know were there while he was looking for something completely different.
I mean, that's the reason why you become a gravestone conservator.
Yeah.
You know, is because you get to actually get into the ground in a way that other people don't get to and uncover things that other people don't see. So, you know, there's no other reason to become a gravestone conservator. I
guess so. But I'm glad it's worked out for you, and we really appreciate everything you've been doing here.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
We appreciate you too.
Thank you, Rachel, and send our regards to Josh as well.
I will.
Okay. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah.
This is a one of a kind here at the old burial ground. This is the woman was Elizabeth Lord, I think, and this is called a table gravestone or table tomb. And these became very popular, I think, in the 1800s. I don't know why it has a fence around it, but what did happen was a branch of a tree must have come down and hit this corner, knocked off some of the most important wording. So the way these table gravestones came about was the idea was, you know, grandma dies and she's buried here, and now the family can go and they can put a cloth on top and they can have a picnic with grandma. Behind it, right over here, it's an interesting one to me. So this is the body of Deacon Nathaniel Knowlton, and these gravestones. This is 1726. So these gravestones are actually very unique to Ipswich and Raleigh. This one was carved by the Leighton brothers from Raleigh, and they were the stepsons of John Hartshorn, who is quite well known for this particular style. When you become familiar with them, you can see slight differences in how they did the faces, but they typically have these same whorls. And this is a very large one. Many of them are not this large. The lighting is perfect today because the sunlight comes right across the gravestones and creates a shadow over the inscriptions. Now, Hartshorn and then his stepsons Leighton were using a kind of a slate that you found further north of here up in New Hampshire, and it tends to be rather delicate. It flakes, so take a look at here. The face is starting to fall off right here, and so that's why you'll see a sign when you walk into the old burial ground not to do any gravestone rubbing, because these in particular you could break off the little pieces. Now this side over here, where I'm standing from here over, this is later period of the cemetery. They actually moved the house, which sits on Summer Street now, and most of these gravestones, when you look in this direction, you're going to notice that they are made of marble, and marble, like limestone, is very subject to acid rain. The faces really just sort of dissolve over time. I don't find them as interesting anyway, but it would be great to find a way to try to preserve these before the inscriptions are completely gone. But coming back over here to the slate gravestones, these are what we call gravestone art, and this burial ground is full of them. So let's walk back over to this path here that we came in on. There's a story that this was originally the edge of the old cemetery, which extended over to about where that blue house is there. In the winter, when people died, they couldn't dig a grave. You know, back then the ground would freeze 3 or 4 feet deep. So right along the edge of the cemetery where this old asphalt path is, they had a trench that they would dig when the season was warmer, and they had piles of sand. So when you died, they would throw you in the trench and throw a little sand over you, and then perhaps maybe if your loved ones came for your body later on in the spring, they would take your body and bury it somewhere else. What happened was this asphalt, I think, dates back to the CCC days, so it's probably 90-year-old asphalt, really ready for replacement. And so when they put this in, they moved a few of the gravestones on the other side with the limestone ones. Here's a perfect example of the kind of gravestone that was being carved in the Boston area. You see the skull and the wings. This says, "Here lies interred the body of Miss Lydia Burley." She was the wife of Andrew Burley, aged 39 years. She died August 25th, 1736. So a guy named William Moulton was the primary carver of these stones from here all the way up to Boston. The idea with this kind of gravestone was, you know, when you die, it's like final. You're dead, and you got the wings. You're going to go to heaven, but whatever you've done in life, you're going to. That's it. I don't know if they had the same concept of an afterlife that religious people had later on. The slate on these stones is a much finer slate. I think it was found west of Boston. I want to show you a little bit about how this idea of the skull and the wings evolved over a period of time, because there's a couple over here that have perfect light on right at the moment. Okay, so this guy, Dr. Joseph Manning, he was the grandfather of Dr. Thomas Manning, who deeded the school to Ipswich, the first high school. Thomas Manning's father, Dr. John Manning, was famous for bringing the smallpox vaccination. This guy's house is still standing. It's actually on South Main Street. It's one of the stores with huge picture windows now. It's a hip roof house. It's a federal period house. And just like Andrew Burley's house, whom we just looked at, that's an earlier house from actually in the late 1600s. And you'll recognize where this house is. It is at the corner of, his house is at the corner of Green Street and County Street, quite overgrown, but it's a very historic house. Both of these people were very prominent in the town of Ipswich. So you see what's going on here. We got a different kind of a head. The skull is gone. Now we have the face is almost like an infant's face, like his eyes are closed, but he still has the wings. He's ascending up into heaven. And now the inscriptions are much longer, erected to the memory of Dr. Joseph Manning and Elizabeth, his amiable partner in life, upwards of 46 years, who died January 30th, 1779, and it goes on and on. But I do want to come over here I'm just going to temporarily move this out of the way. As we get into like the late 18th century, this is 1779, Lucy died, and you see here we're well into the age of reason and the Enlightenment, and people have moved away from extreme religiosity, and now there's sort of a concept that's actually drawn from ancient Greece. And first of all, the urn represents the soul. You know, people are cremated, they're put into an urn, and that would be typical. And what you're going to see is this same pattern over and over again. This is a willow tree, and there's a lot of different ideas of what the willow represents on gravestones. But my understanding is the willow is the first tree, the weeping willow is the first tree you're going to see in the spring, with the leaves beginning to yellow and then come to full blossom. It's the tree of spring, so it represents rebirth. There's another interesting gravestone right here. You see a few of these at the old burial ground here in Ipswich, and so it became a popular thing. I think especially up in New Hampshire, there were two carvers who did these. So this man's name was Benjamin Dutch, and his wife Sarah Dutch. And he would carve their faces, wouldn't have any wings anymore, right? And the interesting thing about whoever was carving these gravestones is he basically only had one kind of face that he could draw. And so if you look closely at it, the only real difference in the faces is that one has a part in the hair and the other doesn't. Benjamin Dutch, his house is still standing too at the corner of County Street and Summer Street, and it was recently kind of redone and sold. The blue house on that corner. He might have been the first real estate tycoon in Ipswich. One thing he did is his father lived right across the street. I believe his name was Robert Dutch. When he died, he sold all of these lots his father had used for the back of his yard, like for his basically farm. Sold them in little lots, and so when you're walking down Summer Street from North Main Street, all of those lots, very small, and the houses date to about the period between 1718, maybe up to 1740. He made a bunch of money there off of this. Let's walk on up here. I've got some pretty interesting stories I want to show you. This is the gravestone of Martha Treadwell. Now, there's a story that goes with her, and of course we never know if these kind of ghostly stories are true or not, because after all, the stories are 300 years old. Martha died in, I believe, 1727, and she was 1727, she was only 27 years old. So the story goes that there were two sisters, Martha, I believe Mary was the other sister, and let's say that Martha was the wicked sister. When she got ill, she told her sister, Mary, don't ever touch my stuff. You can't have my clothes or anything after I die. So, Mary had always been scared of her sister. When Martha died, here's her gravestone. So then Mary was a young girl, and when she got old enough to have a suitor, she decided to go into Martha's stuff and find a really nice dress. So she wore the dress, and they went on a date to whatever they did back in those days. The story goes that as she was preparing for that, she went out to look at herself in the well for reflection, because she didn't have a mirror, right? And then when she looked in the well, she saw Martha looking back up at her. So I guess she went out on this date with a young man, and at night she fell sick, and they had a nursemaid there, and when they came in the morning, they found both of them lying there dead. So the story about that house, the Treadwell, Wainwright Treadwell house, it's across from the town landing, and everybody who lives there, these are very reasonable people, say very odd things happen in that house. When the present occupants of that house, owners of that house, moved in, things just began falling off of tables in the room, one of the bedrooms. Perhaps that was Martha's bedroom. Who knows? But it's one of the great ghost stories that we have in Ipswich, and I have quite a number of them on a post on my site on Historic Ipswich called the Haunted Houses of Ipswich. So take a look at that. In the 18th century, there was a man very successful businessman in the town of Ipswich named Dummer Jewett. He and his wife had 3 children who died really early. She just mentioned that the stone, when I first saw this, I thought someone had cut it, but I found another stone very similar to this, so some of the slate has a fault in it, and the piece apparently just cracked off. But here's what it says, in memory of these 3 children of Dummer Jewett. The first Jedediah died December 6, 1766, aged 2 months. The second Jedediah died February 15, 1771, age 14 months. And then the third Jedediah died September 11, 1773, age 12 months. At the bottom it reads, "Hopeful we sprung, but soon disease and death seized our frail bodies and recalled our breath. Grieve not at heaven's decree, but God adore, and place your hope on fading things no more." Close to the Dummer Jewett's children's gravestone is this one. This is probably the most photographed gravestone in the old Ipswich cemetery. His name was Reverend Nathaniel Rogers, and he came to Ipswich at a time when, there was a lot of infighting in the church, and people in the Ipswich loved the town. We still fight about all kinds of things today. He managed to bring the town together. He died in 1775 at age 74, and many people come and they see this gravestone as the first shot that they take. One thing I want to mention is when you come here, the light really needs to be perfect. There are 2 periods of the year when I can actually do a tour of the old burial ground, and one is right now in October. It would be nice, even nicer, when the leaves fall off the trees, but the sun is just right. It's right there. It sets kind of like over those houses, over close to Lord Square, and it sweeps right across the wording on these gravestones. You get to read them. In the morning, there are a few gravestones that face the other way, so if you come about 10 o'clock in the morning when it kind of comes over the trees, you get a chance to read those. The other time of year, maybe for only about a 2-week period in spring, the sun is in basically the same position, and you can go at the end of the day. I'd say between 2 to 4:30 is the perfect time to come and read these inscriptions. There's a lot of words here. We won't read all of this one today because I want to show you some right over here. Elizabeth Perkins, and if you look carefully, you'll see that their name is spelled Perkins, like the tree, Perkins. Spelling wasn't standardized, till Daniel Webster, and so you'll find all kinds of spellings. Also, because I don't think these gravestone carvers actually were that great of spellers, so I don't know if they get a discount sometimes. You'll even notice sometimes that they get to the end of the line and they kind of ran out of room, and they'll make the letters for the dates perhaps really small. So Elizabeth Perkins, the Perkins family has been here for a long, long time. This is a house on the corner of Jeffreys Neck Road and East Street. It's kind of pink colored, and that house has never ever been sold because it's a Perkins house, and it's been handed down generation to generation, and the current owner of that house is a descendant of that same family. This is Sheriff John Harris. You're all familiar with the Salem witchcraft trials, I'm sure, and the people of Ipswich were quite opposed to the trials. As a matter of fact, when the men brought those girls who were pointing out people as witches, it said that the people of Ipswich stood on the bridge, which is about where the Choke Bridge is now, and wouldn't let them bring those girls into town. And not only that, this isn't actually told in history quite so often, but Ipswich is the place where the Salem witchcraft trials ended. There were about 100 cases that were still outstanding when the trials were ended in Salem, because the governor's wife had been pointed out and he put an end to it. So they brought the trials to, about 100 people were brought to Ipswich, and we let them all go. 5 people were tried, and we found them all innocent. That was the end of the Salem witchcraft trials. But unfortunately, our jail was used as a place to store the overflow from the Salem jail, and this guy, Sheriff John Harris, it was his unfortunate duty to carry these poor accused people to their trials from Ipswich jail to Salem. It would be manacled to a cart and hauled there to be put in those cold, dank, dark, dungeony prisons. We did have one woman, Elizabeth Howe, who was among the first 5 people that were hung during the Salem witchcraft trials. She lived out in the Linebrook area. Over here, one of the most interesting names in Ipswich history, and the only person with that name since biblical times. This woman's name was Haselepania Wood. The word Haselepania, it comes from Hebrew. There was only one person in recorded history who had that name. She was one of the members of the family of Judah and the book of Judah in the Bible. The word, when deciphered from Hebrew, means a shadow falls upon me. So it's not a kind of a name you might want to give your kids. However, what happened here was she was born up in Exeter, New Hampshire, and when she was still a child, her mother was waylaid by robbers and was killed. Her father became very despondent, and he indentured his hazel ponies, people came to know her, to some wealthier people. When she grew older, she married a man who was a sailor, and she lived in Boston. Unfortunately, he was lost at sea, and she was left a widow with a number of children. She met a man from this town named Obadiah Wood. His occupation was biscuit maker, which means baker, I guess. And so he was a widower, she was a widow, both of them had children. They married, and then they had a few children of their own. I think in her lifetime she had almost 20 children that she was the mother or stepmother of. I'm sure many of you have been to the 1640 Hart House out on Linebrook Road. Great restaurant. It's an authentically really old house, although dendrochronology shows that it was probably built about 1678 or 1680 by Thomas Hart's son. And here we are with what are 2 of the oldest gravestones in the Old North Burial Ground. It's Thomas Hart, 1673, and his wife, Alice Hart. And all of these behind me are all members of the Hart family. They had their own special burial ground here, a little place just for the Hart family. And there's 1 or 2 other Harts. So when you eat at the Hart House restaurant, you are eating in perhaps one of the oldest restaurants in the entire world, I would think. And you're not sitting very far from where the people who built that building are buried, right here. I'm sure you know where the Whipple House is. It's the Ipswich Museum's historic house. It originally was actually on the other side of town by the railroad tracks across from where the Institution for Savings is now. And then in the early 1900s, the Historical Society moved the Whipple House up Market Street, over the Choate Bridge, and took it and put it where it is today. This is Catherine Whipple. She was the wife of John Whipple, who was the builder of that house. I don't know where his gravestone is. Many gravestones are just not here. They disappeared over a period of time. But this is her, and here is their daughter. It says, "Here lies what was mortal, Miss Sarah Whipple, the daughter of John Whipple," and the rest of it, July 1713, age 16 years, I believe is what it says. A lot of young women died very early. People married and had children much earlier than they do today. That was one of the primary causes of mortality for young women. And then, of course, there are so many epidemics. Smallpox and diphtheria would come through every once in a while. So along the way, we're probably going to see a lot of children's graves as well. So we come up the hill a little bit here, and we have the hillside right behind us. And so this is one of the Mumford gravestones. The man whose name was Daniel Moulton. You can see it's got that same skull and wings, and he died in 1730. Right behind it here, Francis Hovey. And this one is a small gravestone that was made by John Hartshorne. The date of death on this person is 1710. Remember, Hartshorne was the man who carved with these just little round cherubic faces. One of the things that distinguishes him from his stepsons, the Laytons, who carved very similar gravestones, was Hartshorne put these little birds. And whether they're doves or what kind of bird, I don't know, but the idea of the bird was something like that your soul would be flown up into heaven. It says here lies the body of Francis Hovey, who died June 19th, 1710, age 2 years. So here's one of those young children, 2 years, 4 months, and 20 days, very young. Next to him over here is Hannah Lakeman's body. This again is one of those William Mumford gravestones. What I'd like to show you is behind it one of the most famous people in Ipswich history. First of all, his wife. This is Grace Dennis. Again, you see this is definitely by Hartshorne. You see the birds here with the face. Here lies the body of Mrs. Grace Dennis. She was the wife of Thomas Dennis, who died October 24th, 1686, aged 50 years. Her husband, Thomas Dennis, right over here. The body of Thomas Dennis. So I mentioned that he's one of the most famous people from Ipswich, and that is because he was a master joiner. That's what carpenters, we might say, or cabinet makers today were called at the time, because when they made things out of wood, they literally joined them. They would mortise and tenon and perhaps glue and use pegs and dowels. The pegs from the trees, they would call them tree nails or trentles. And regardless of whether they're building a house or cabinets, as this man built, they were all joined together like that with wood pieces, and everything was hand planed. They were using the tools that they had available today. The cabinets that he made are very intricate and became so popular in the early 20th century that people were claiming that these knockoffs that they had were Thomas Dennis chests, and antiques collectors had to kind of establish a standard for what a Thomas Dennis chest was. There's one in the Whipple House, and if you were to try to buy a Thomas Dennis chest today, an authentic Thomas Dennis chest, I'm sure it would cost you at least $50,000. His house, in Grace's house, is still standing on County Street. It's red, and it's not too far from the intersection with East Street. And this is their son back here, his son Thomas Dennis, who died quite young, only 33 years of age. This is Mark Haskell. This is his wife, Elizabeth, the wife of Mark Haskell, son of Deacon Mark Haskell, who departed this life 1783. The words down below read, "The world's a shadow, life a span, toil, pain, and death, the lot of man. But grace substantial good supplies, hope here and endless bliss above the skies." Now, you know, he was a deacon in the church, at least his father was, but they were, like many Ipswich families, a slave owning family. We know this because one of Deacon Mark Haskell's slaves, his name was Cato, escaped and was on the run, and somewhere in the process was accused of killing a person. And so there were these ads that were posted in publications to be on the lookout for Cato, the slave of Deacon Mark Haskell. Slavery in New England was not the same as slavery in the Deep South. The enslaved persons often lived in part of the people's house, but they were still owned, and their children, even their wives and husbands, could be sold. Slavery ended in Massachusetts not long after the Revolutionary War. We were one of the first states to do so, and we recently celebrated the the first person, the life of the first person in Ipswich to successfully sue for her freedom, and then the person who was actually literally enslaved out in Sheffield, Mass. Her name was Mum. I'm forgetting her last name. She sued, and the Massachusetts Constitution already outlawed slavery, and that was the end of slavery in Massachusetts. Here lies the worshipful Major General Daniel Dennison. There's a story behind this guy. When the settlers came to Ipswich, there was 12 men who sailed from Boston, left their families in Boston, and set up very rudimentary places to winter over. They built their first houses and brought their families the next year. They were led by a man named John Winthrop Jr. He was the son of the governor. The governor had, Governor Winthrop had other plans for John Winthrop Jr. other than staying here with the Ipswich colony. And despite the fact that the town begged him to stay and gave him huge pieces of land, including all of Argilla Road all the way out to Crane Beach, he went on, John Winthrop Jr. left the colony here in Ipswich and went to Connecticut, where he eventually became the governor of Connecticut. So the people of Ipswich were quite distraught. They didn't have a leader. They always thought that the man who brought him here was going to stay, but he didn't. So there was a young man, Daniel Dennison, who had come to Boston with his parents, and he was educated in England. He was the perfect candidate. They asked him to come and be the leader of his town. He became the town's clerk. He was the military leader of the town. He became a major general in the colonial forces here in Massachusetts. The way they supported him is that people would subscribe to Dennison. You'll find that phrase frequently in our historic books. So if you had enough money, you were expected to make an allowance for Dennison, to pledge a certain amount of money. If you were a poorer person, you still hopefully would be a subscriber to Dennison. He far exceeded any expectations that the people of Ipswich had in this young man, and he led the colony there to 1682. So for 40 years, he was the leader of this town. This was a child. It says, here lies buried Thomas Berry, son of Thomas and Margaret Berry, aged 6 weeks, 2 days, died September 28, 1690. Now, he was the son of a doctor, one of the richest people in town, and his name was also Thomas Berry. He had a house on High Street, and he also had a farm, which was out where our transfer station is on Town Farm Road. Thomas Berry, well, Thomas Franklin Waters, the historian whom I get so much information from, wrote back in 1900 that Thomas Berry was the last of the Ipswich aristocracy. He would ride through town on a chariot, and he had 2 slaves. One was a footman, and the other drove his chariot. Thomas Berry would wear a red cape, and it would go flying behind him on his back there as they took this carriage down the road. And people were so in awe and perhaps a little afraid of this guy that they would bow to him as his carriage would go down the road. One of the things that this so-called doctor, Thomas Berry, believed was, his house was on High Street, and up behind is the hillside, the same hillside that extends all the way down here to the old cemetery. And there are some springs there, and that's why we have a street named Spring Street. So that Spring Street goes up to where the spring was. That Thomas Berry believed that if you would go up there every day and take a cold bath, no matter what time of day it was or what time of year it was, that it would preserve your health and give you longevity. Well, unfortunately, it didn't work so well, because these diseases had no reverence for cold water, smallpox, diphtheria, and whatever that came along. There's so many diseases. Those diseases eventually were the reason why we lost so much of our Native American population as well. So this is one of the buried gravestones that fortunately faces the right direction for the sun today. But right behind him over here, this is the gravestone of Thomas Berry. This is his wife, right here. I think this is 2 of his daughters, and unfortunately the wife and the daughters all died quite young of diseases, so the cold bath apparently didn't work quite so well. It's a real shame that this gravestone is beginning to deteriorate so much. You see the little pieces here of the slate are flaking off. It says, here lies the body of Dr. Philemon Dean, who died in October 1716, aged 70 years. I have a photo that was taken in the 1800s, and it tells the rest of the story that we can't really read here today. His wife had two children, twins were born. The wife and one of the twins died during childbirth. One of the twins survived, and he eventually became a doctor, also named Philemon Dean, and his house is still standing. Sometimes it's referred to as the old lace factory. If you take the brick sidewalk over right next to the dam, there's a white house there on the corner on South Main Street, and that is the Philemon Dean house. That's the home of the son that survived. And I don't have the wording with me, but it says something like this: grieve no more at heaven's decree, for you will be joined in heaven with those that you adore and love. We took a little break there for just a moment to let the sun come back out from behind that cloud. So I wanted to tell you about what's behind me here. The graveyard here, we've been in the very oldest part, and that's what I'm going to be showing you more off today, but expanded to the left, expanded to the right, and it even expanded up the hillside here. This is the Victorian period cemetery up here, with a lot of pedestals that will have names of whole family genealogies on it, a tribute to all those people. They must have thought when they built this cemetery that labor was cheap, and maybe it was at that time, because it's really a hard job for our parks and cemetery department to get up there and mow and trim all the weeds that have grown. And I'm going to say that they've done a really awesome job. When we began this cemetery restoration project a number of years ago, we were having some problems with sumac, and Japanese knotweed was going up here. There were places where you could barely even see the stones. They went through and they cleared it all out. They also cleared out some of the branches, a few of the trees that were aging, because when those tree branches fall down, they hit these stones. You've seen what can happen. They can really break them. So also behind us here we have the Hurd tomb. There is a 1836, I don't know, can't read who that one is. Behind us here's another one from 1848. The Lourdes are right there with a pedestal, and continues over. Treadwells are over there. So those are built into the hillside, and part of our restoration program has been to restore those. So if you look right over here, there's a brick one that the face of that gravestone was bulging out. I mean, the tomb was bulging out. It's the last tomb over here, and the Parks and Cemetery Department funded having that completely restored. Now, right next to it are these steps that go up. And I just want to say, I have seen people even running up those steps, but they are really, really dangerous. Some of them pitch up, some of them pitch down. It's a lot easier to walk up them than down. Walking down can be very treacherous, especially the time of year when you start getting a little bit of ice on the stones. So I would just suggest that people that want to walk up the hill, there are small steps on the terraces that go from one terrace to another, and that you find that a lot safer way to walk up. A little while ago, we saw the gravestone of Jacob Perkins' wife, and here we found Jacob Perkins himself. And he was the son of one of the original Perkins who built that pink house that I mentioned is at the corner of East Street and Summer Street. And his house, as I said, has never been sold. It's been in the family all these generations. It's because, you know what, people love this town. We tend to, argue about things that we don't want to see changed. And it's a lot different than other towns. I've been here for over 20 years, and I've really come to love Ipswich so much, not only for all of its virtues, but even maybe sometimes for some of our vices. You recall that we were looking at the broken gravestone of Dummer Jewett's children. And this is a summer stone. The three little faces represent the children. This monument is erected in memory of three children of Mr. Nathaniel and Mrs. Mary Smith. An infant daughter, six hours, born April 1769. Ephraim Jewett Smith died November 17, 1778, only 18 months old. Ephraim Jewett Smith, and this will be the second, died October 30th, 1783, I believe it says, age 21 months. People really love their children, and they made some very wonderful gravestones to honor these children that died so young. This is the gravestone of Nathaniel and Hannah Smith, right behind. We're walking over to the west side of the cemetery, and the Lord family was one of the largest families in Ipswich. Matter of fact, right over there is Lord Square, and it's said that the members of the Lord family probably lived in every house on High Street. So all of this right here is a large family plot for the Lord family. It's not the only members of the Lord family here. There are quite a few over there. I do lead occasional genealogy tours, and I had people the other day who were looking for the gravestones of their Lord ancestors. So I had quite a job. I came out here and flagged all the Lord gravestones for them to come and see. So we seem to have a theme here. This monument is erected to the memory of four children of Deacon Nathaniel and Mrs. Ellis Kimball, an infant son, stillborn, October 31, 1757. David died January 16, 1701, aged 3 weeks and 5 days. Elizabeth, daughter Elizabeth, died August 17, 1701, aged 13 weeks and 6 days. Aaron died September the 10th, 1779, aged 5 weeks and 4 days. Really sad story for the family of Nathaniel and Mrs. Ellis Kimball. Joseph Hodgkins served in the Revolutionary War with Colonel Wade. Colonel Wade's house is still standing across from the South Green, a large gable roof house. Joseph Hodgkins wrote his wife all through the Revolutionary War. His wife was Sarah Perkins. She would answer him as well, and we're just so fortunate that that collection of letters, many of them were saved. Sarah would save them at home, and he would save the letters also. And you can imagine the things he was going through at Valley Forge, at Long Island. Terrible times. Sometimes he would write home to her and say, "We have no shoes. Could you please send us shoes?" So he is considered to be one of the most important soldiers in the Revolution. Because of those letters, we know a lot about what was happening in the battles of Long Island and in New York State and down in Connecticut. Well, this has got to be one of the most unusual gravestones here at the old burial ground. It's only marked EL, and it says AE 48, and that means age 48, 1647. Now, that's a lot older than the hearts right over there that were 1670s and 80s. It's in a line of gravestones here, all belong to the Lakeman family. Could be an Ebenezer, Elizabeth Lakeman, I'm not sure. We do know this, though, that in the glass plate negatives that I've received, that I put on my site, the images, we have a picture of the same gravestone set in red sandstone way back in the, I think it was about 1870, and it's listed also in Memento Mori, the book that I showed you at the beginning of this tour. So if this gravestone, simple marker, which is what we think that maybe the Puritans were using in the earliest days, if this is authentic, I'm going to say that this is probably the oldest gravestone in Massachusetts, at least, if not, North America. This gravestone is really quite extraordinary. It says Mrs. Mary Burnham, wife of Thomas Burnham, died March the 27th, 1715, aged 92 years. Can you imagine people lived that long? But listen to this. She was the mother of 15 children, and she was the grandmother of 70 children. A couple of orphan gravestones here leaning up against this tree. We don't really know quite where they go. I'll have to look in the book Memento Mori and see if we can find. It says, so much of this is missing because you can see that the slate has really begun to deteriorate, but it says here lies the body of Lucy Kimball, and she was the wife of Caleb Kimball. There were 2 or 3 Caleb Kimballs, but the Caleb Kimball house is up here on High Street. It's a blue house. It used to be white, and it's always had orange shutters, and it's known locally as the house with orange shutters. Another gravestone here that is so deteriorated it's really hard to read what it was. I'm sure all of you have been to Appleton Farms. It's the oldest continuously operating farm in America. It was originally deeded to Samuel Appleton, the settler, way back in the 1630s. He had 3 sons, John, Samuel, and Isaac, and he had daughters. The farm was deeded to them in parts, and that farm has been reassembled from time to time. It's now owned by trustees of reservations, and it's a wonderful place to visit. If you're a descendant of Samuel Appleton, you've hit the jackpot when you come to this spot right here. There's quite a number of Appleton's gravestones here. So Samuel Appleton, aged 70 years, died 1696. That's the son of Samuel Appleton, the settler. Right back behind here, Elizabeth Appleton, deceased June 15, 1703, in her 16th year of her age. Right behind her, this is Mr. Isaac Appleton. This would be a couple of 3 generations later. You can tell by the later gravestone. Matter of fact, when you're in here looking for Appletons, you're going to find those names, especially Elizabeth, Samuel, and John, repeated many times. Here we have the footstone, W.J. Appleton. Here's the body of, guess what, another John Appleton. It says John Appleton. And they ran out of room, so they put senior and spelled it S-E-N-E-R, who died the 17th of May, 1721, in the 54th year of his age. This here is the footstone of Elizabeth Appleton, yet another Elizabeth. Right next to Isaac Appleton, here she is, in memory of Mrs. Elizabeth Appleton, the virtuous and pious consort of Mr. Isaac Appleton, who died who departed this life April 29, 1785, age 75. And right next to me right here, yet another John Appleton, who died November 4th, 1699, in the 77th year of his age. So this John Appleton was the brother of John Appleton. And then here's actually a very wonderful monument to yet another John and Elizabeth Appleton. The light is not right here for us to be able to read this today, so come in the morning. I'd say 10 or 11 o'clock, the sun comes right over here, shines on these letters, so we can't even read it all right now. It's a long inscription about both of them, and they were buried here together. This one's actually rather unique. It's kind of a gravestone. I haven't seen any others like this one in our Old North burial ground, but I understand there are a number of these as you get up into the Newbury area. Nathaniel Emerson, he died I think in 1712, and he was aged 83. So what does this tell us about us is that he was one of the original settlers who came to New England here with the Great Puritan migration. And it's actually quite large. Here's, I believe, his footstone is right here, Nathaniel Emerson as well. Reverend Levi Frisbee was the pastor of the first church in Ipswich. This is his wife. One of the things about Reverend Frisbee is that he had political connections with people in Washington. He received a copy of the Declaration of Independence from Boston, and I think that's the copy that we have in our Ipswich Town Hall. He was a minister of the church for a number of years. His house is still standing on County Street, close to the intersection of Green Street. It's a house that he built. His life had a lot of sadnesses. Back here we'll see that he lost one of his wives. So this is Zervia, I believe, or Zervia Frisbee, the amiable and virtuous consort of Reverend Levi Frisbee. I believe she may have been the first one to die. Over here, one of the daughters, I believe this, Sarah Frisbee, yet another daughter. There was a lot of sadness in the man's life, but he was a very well respected and beloved minister of First Church. Back over here, this dude, General Michael Farley, was our town leader during the period of time of the Revolutionary War. His house was on Market Street. It was torn down to build a building that now is the Richdale's store across from the Ipswich post office. This is, I believe, is his wife here. He had 2 or 3 sons who were also fought in the Revolutionary War. There's a plaque to the Frisbees, to the Farleys, when you walk into the Ipswich Public Library. And it's a real shame that they tore down his house to build a convenience. Well, it was a service station, and then it became a convenience store. This was one of the great leaders of the town during that period of time. And there's a story about him when Lafayette came to Ipswich as a very young man to fight with the revolutionary forces. It was a big deal. We wanted the French on our side. So when something like 10,000 troops marched through Ipswich right at the beginning of the Revolutionary War, they encamped themselves right there on the North Green, and the selectmen of the town came out to greet young Lafayette, who was probably only about 21 years old. When Michael Farley went to bow to the young man, he forgot that he had his cap pinned onto his wig. So he went to take his cap off, and when he did so, his cap and his wig fell to the ground. Well, the other selectmen were, so embarrassed, so horrified for him, that they all took off their caps and wigs and threw them on the ground as well. So when Lafayette came back to Ipswich as an old man in his 70s, I think, and we recently put a plaque about this right there across from the First Church, one of the things he commented about was that the people of Ipswich have such an unusual way of greeting their visitors. There was a terrible epidemic of diphtheria and other diseases that seemed to combine, came down from the north and came up from Boston, and during the late 1700s and especially 1720s and 1730s, sometimes a family would wake up every morning and find another child dead. This is the Abbey family here. Here lies the body. The light's getting a little dim here, but Abbey, daughter of Joseph and Tamazan Abbey, who died November 1726. I believe this is age 9 years, 4 months. Next to them, in between some of the Abbey children, is William Stacy, son of Mr. Samuel and Mrs. Margaret Stacy, who died the 29th of March, 1726. He's the same year, aged only 3 months old. Sarah Abbey, so here we have 2 Sarah Abbeys who both died, and she was the daughter of Joseph and Tanisa, it says, and I can't quite read which year that was or what age. And then they had a son, also named Joseph, and he died as well. Captain Nathaniel Treadwell. His house was on Meeting House Green, well, North Main Street as you come up from Market Square. I believe it's the fourth house on the left. It's sort of mustard colored, and it was the tavern. It was the tavern of the day, leading up to the period of the Revolutionary War. John Adams often stayed there, and he would write letters, of course, to his dear wife Abigail. Wrote about Ipswich, wrote about going for walks out at the Neck. Wrote a lot while he was at Treadwell's Inn about his concerns and misgivings about the political matters of the day. He was concerned that we really weren't up to the Revolutionary War that everybody was wanting to fight. Of course, we know that when it came down to it, he was one of the great leaders. He became, John Adams, who stayed at Treadwell's Inn, became the first vice president of the United States and the second president. And his wife is right here in memory of Mrs. Hannah Treadwell, relict of Captain Nathaniel Treadwell. She died July 6, 1792, aged 87 years. Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord, for they rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. So we've done a nice little circuit here in the oldest part of the old burial ground. But before we leave, I want to take you to one more gravestone, and this is the mass burial victims of a shipwreck that happened a couple hundred years ago. Let's go. This reads, the brig Falconer was wrecked on Ipswich Beach, December 17, 1847. 17 of the passengers and crew were lost. 12 lie buried here in one common grave, and it lists the names of those people. So what happened was, this was a December nor'easter. It was a terrible storm. This ship, the Falconer, was an old ship. It was coming down from I believe from Belfast, Maine. There was a blinding storm. The captain of the ship got disoriented, and instead of rounding Cape Ann, he ended up here in Ipswich Bay, and the ship grounded on the sandbar that extends out from Plum Island. So they were something like maybe 1,000 feet off the beach. Now, we did have a lighthouse back in those days, but this happened maybe something like 2 miles down the beach, going towards the point. So the lightkeeper, he would do his rounds, and he saw this ship out there. At first the people were just stranded, but as the storm got heavier and heavier, the ship began to fill with water. The hull was breached, and so there was a lot of cargo. This ship was actually carrying the maximum amount of coal that it was designed for. And not only that, it was carrying people who were getting cheap passage trying to get to Boston. Many of them were in the hull, and so when the hull filled with water, they had to come out into the storm, and already the sails had broken off and gone flying, and people were strapping themselves with ropes or whatever they could find to the broken off mast. So people of Ipswich, when they got word that this was going on out there, and this storm went on overnight into the next morning, they rushed out to the beach, and people found lifeboats at the lighthouse and dragged them all the way down 2 miles down to where they could get across from where this tragedy was unfolding. There was the first person who tried to go out with the boat. He himself became stranded. He got to the boat, and his own boat filled with water, and he then became one of the people stranded there. But over time, at least people saw that it could be done, and so more and more boats managed to get out there and rescue people and bring them back. And by this time, so many of the people on the Falconer had actually died, frozen to death, strapped to those masts in this terrible snowstorm and the howling wind. So the survivors that they were able to rescue, they brought them first to one of the houses that's close to Crane Beach, and then the people of Ipswich opened their doors and brought these survivors in and fed them and nursed them and brought them back to health. Some of them, the captain and his wife's body were shipped back up to Maine. Then there was a funeral procession. So the funeral was at the first church, and this procession, all the people in the town by this time had become invested in what is going on here. They had either tried to rescue the victims of this tragedy or taken them into their homes. And so when they had this funeral, the funeral procession then walked from First Church up at the North Green all the way down High Street to the spot here where they buried, the people that were buried here, the 12 people. And the historic record of that funeral is that when they got here, the rear end of the funeral procession was still leaving the churchyard. So thank you for joining me on this tour of the Old North Burial Ground in Ipswich on High Street. Stories of tragedy, stories of really heroic people, stories of people, men and women and children who made this the wonderful town that it is today. If you would like to read more about it, go to historicipswich.net, and in the menu up above, click on burial grounds, and believe it or not, there are about 10 burial grounds related to Ipswich. Several burial grounds right here in the town, even the one in Hamilton and the one in Essex, the old burial grounds there were part of this town as well. And fortunately, over the years, all of these burial grounds have been indexed. We've had a lot of help from the Ipswich Parks and Cemetery Department on some of these projects. The Old South Burial Ground is down at the South Green. It's another very historic burial ground that was created maybe about 100 years after this one. All of these are very interesting places to visit. If you don't get a chance to visit them in person, and I think you would enjoy it if you do, at least you can go to historicipswich.net, click on burial grounds, then click on the one that you want to visit. All the names with photos from the Find a Grave site, the photos that we took in the Historical Commission are right there for you to see today. Thank you for coming.